Good morning. Well, some of you arrived at 9 o'clock. Great. You attended the previous session. You didn't fall asleep, and we'll try to do even better and wake you up. I won't go for the long, thank you, congratulations, and all that. I just want to introduce the session. And the thing we don't talk a lot during those conferences is the consumer and the wine sales. And actually, if we don't sell the wine, none of this can exist, and the wine industry disappears. So today, I have Robert Joseph, Damien Wilson, myself on stage, and we're gonna, be a little bit harsh on everything we are doing in the wine industry and in the communication, and we're gonna insist on the importance of caring about wine sales. So Damien's gonna start, I'll go on, and then Robert is gonna close the presentations. Thank you.
Okay. Now, not being a frequent Mac user, I just want to see if this, if I can get this thing to work.
Oh, sorry.
Spacebar? I've got it. I've got it. It's all under control. I figured it out. Thank you, Mark, for first of all inviting me to present in this section. I should start, for those of you who don't know, this husky voice isn't the way I normally speak. It's not here to try and seduce you all or anything like that. It's simply a case of, as an academic, my job is to communicate information, and I think I've probably been doing far too much of that, and probably in the wrong forum in the last few days. My name's Damien Wilson. I am the Professor of Wine Business at the Burgundy School of Business. I run a program called the MSc in Wine Business, and with some luck you'll have come across some of my current and some of my former students who I'm very happy to say frequenting this conference. We find this conference integral to the education of budding professionals in the wine sector. And we have deliberately taken a strategic approach in trying to get them to interact with and to learn about what's happening in the wine sector. So with some luck, if you come across them, you'll both be impressed and take the time to help nurture their professional development as people who are going to help save the wine sector. When I was putting this presentation together, there were a couple of things that came to mind to begin with. The organisers were particularly good. Ryan and Gabriella were very diplomatic in pointing out that academics really aren't the best presenters. I know, I couldn't believe it either. We are familiar with communicating information and making trying to communicate far too much information in far too short a time. And so Gabriella was kind enough to send links to good presentation techniques. How perhaps, Damien, you might want to consider preparing your presentation. Perhaps if you don't put too many things here, perhaps if you don't talk too long, and these links to lovely sites, some with a big red circle like a stop smoking sign, but underneath it had the word suck. You don't want your presentations to suck. So in my mind, I've deliberately tried to put together a series of slides that don't suck. Whether that works or not, I don't know, and I guess we'll find out at the end based on what comments and questions there are. And I must admit, I got here early so I could see the first session. I was particularly interested in seeing Justin present, as well as Paul Mowbray, Alistair Bathgate. I'm seeing Louise animate the session, and listen to Richard talk about journalism in the wine sector. And I looked at all of those presentations and thought, gee, they look pretty good. I'm not quite sure that mine isn't going to suck, but we'll see how that goes. But the second thing that came to mind about preparing this presentation was the frustration that this topic has for me. Right? Since I began in the wine sector, a period of time approaching 30 years now, these instructions, the information we're presenting, what I saw in their session isn't new. They've been presenting, they're telling the same message we've been saying over decades. The information we need to convey, the way we need to generate interest, the way we need to think outside the square and consider the interests of the consumer. And yet, we still persist with these PR messages, or as it was famously indicated by Richard, saying how all of these press releases have been deleted because they start with press release. Now, I tried with a tweet in the previous session and put hot topic at the start of it, and within 2 minutes, 6 people had retweeted it. I just led off with the right thing. All of a sudden, a very simple message that I got from that session, which was particularly interesting, has changed my way just from listening to what people are doing. And I think the problem is we've been saying this message for a while, but to go back to yesterday's presentation, from the keynote, from Clark Smith as a keynote, quoting George Bernard Shaw, we fool ourselves into believing that we've communicated, and we haven't. All we've done is stood up with a megaphone at the front of our podium and spoken about how good we are. If I stand up here and tell you how good I am, how much interest have you got? I'm already seeing their heads going down into the computers. I'm hoping that's because they're going to tweet about it, or Facebook. But from what I saw in the first session, it's probably just as likely that someone's working on communicating through MSN with friends, or working on something else that they're preparing for later in the day. So tweets or press releases saying, we've just released our wine, this wine is on sale somewhere, those sorts of things don't work, and yet we continue to do them, despite these messages being constant over the last few decades. And with these messages resonating as the typical wine communicator's MO, what can we do to change it? So I want the answer to that question. I want to know how we can get the message received, because we've been communicating it ad infinitum for decades and it's not hitting home. So what are we doing wrong? Are we using the wrong format, the wrong medium? Have I been taking the too softly approach? I think my students will tell you I hit them from day one saying it's not about the wine, it's about your skills as a business person. Some students get it, some don't. Most, to my chagrin, come out still talking about what a great wine they had last night, and they've never mentioned the place, the location, the people it's with, where it can be bought, how much it costs. You're not that important to other people's lives. You need to be important to other people to get them to capture what you're saying. And so I figured I just can't continue this softly approach. I have to be more direct. I have to hit people in the face with the ideas and the suggestions. And hopefully that'll hit home. I'm going to lose some students for that. I know that for a fact. I'm going to lose some support from the sector. But if I don't have an opinion and I can't stand by it, what am I here for in the first place? I'm an academic and I have to convey research and facts. I do not have the luxury of being able to express my opinion. 30 years working in the wine sector, or almost, before I started working as an academic, seems to go out the window once you take on the hat of being someone who is regarded for their knowledge and information distribution. And at a time when opinion is increasingly taking up Mabre's version of gasoline, I really have to focus on finding what is interesting and what is valuable in facts. And essentially that's what I'm trying to communicate with the essence of this presentation. So, if you're not contributing to a wine sale, this was a cover on Time magazine, and this was 7 years ago, I believe, this cover came out. That was before the financial crisis had hit. This was the whole, hang on, haven't we put too much wine into the market? And yet there was still, in the years leading up to it, no one's taking any notice. Remember, more great wines than ever. Now, we all drink the occasional wine that is either disappointing or a little bit upsetting, but quite frankly, I think you're flat out finding a wine that is undrinkable these days. Quality is a cost of doing business. It's no longer a selling point. Wine quality is better than ever, and there are more choices available to the consumer than ever. So how do we get to this state where wine consumption has plummeted, wine complexity has gone through the roof, we fool ourselves into believing that our sector is this region that we look at through rose-coloured glasses? And as I read about a month ago, suicide rates in France alone have gone up 20% this year on what the average rate is in the agricultural sector. Now, people are dying because of what's happening in the wine sector, and we fool ourselves believing that we're making a difference, and we're not actually measuring what sort of a difference we're making. We need to be better than that. And I think part of the problem started what would have been almost 50 years ago, or no, sorry, more than 50 years ago. It's this, what I'm referring to is what the wine sector's golden age. Between the 60s and the 80s, wine consumption grew globally, almost 50%, from just over 20 to just under 30 billion litres of wine within 20 years. The reality was that if wine was good enough, the wine sold itself. And that was the period, the golden era of quality improvements. Refrigeration came into winemaking. Science started circulating freely amongst wine producers. And before that period, yes, wine was hit and miss. But from that point in time, all of a sudden wine production, wine quality improved to such an extent that quality started becoming the norm. You weren't buying something and risking drinking vinegar. You were buying something that was generally off to a good start. Now, you can argue that it may be much better today. That in itself is true. But during this period of growth in consumption and growth in quality, this really is the formative era of the wine sector. And unfortunately, until fairly recently, the people running the wine sector grew up in this age. People running the big businesses, people who got their experience, they cut their teeth in the wine sector. They did it in this period, this 30-year period where it was all about quality, it was all about improvements in knowledge. And so all of the decisions subsequently from their formative years have driven what's happened in the wine sector since. And so we fool ourselves even today because we look at those peer leaders, we look at those people running the businesses who grew up in this era where it was all about quality, and they tell us that that's what it's about. But what happened from the 1980s onwards? Between the 1980s and now, global wine consumption fell back to 1960s levels to be just over 22 billion litres and roughly static. I could put in the graph with every incremental change, but there's really no point. This is the clarity with the message. And the reality has been that since really the early 1990s, wine has needed help to encourage its sale at every stage. And that's essentially why we find ourselves in this parlous position today. So let's just look at a couple of facts, a couple of statistics to try and help present the situation. If I can somehow advance this slide, give me a second, all right. I'll hit an arrow, there we go. Okay, let's look at wine export trends. Wine outside of its country of production. This is data going back for the most recent 15 years, and you can see I've just picked out 3 countries which seem to get a lot of press for their success in what's happened in the wine market. And in export sales, you've got just since the late 1990s 3 key growing markets in the USA, Australia, and New Zealand. The thing that's most notable to me in that is this finding here. When you look at the numbers, that's the change over the 15-year period. USA exports have gone up 52% in volume. Australians have gone up 39%, and New Zealand's have gone up 33%. And you can see they've clearly been successful in that recent period, despite the global economic crisis. Let's take a look at some countries close to home and the big 3 that are often quoted. It's looking at the other side of the argument. You've got the 3 declining markets in France, Italy, and Spain. These are just export values. And there will be those who will turn around and say, well, yes, Italy's lost 24% over that period, France has lost 19%, and Spain's lost 30%. But you know, if they're drinking the wines at home, that's not necessarily such a bad thing. So export markets have gone down for us here in Europe. This part of the world where wine is regarded as being the most prestigious, the most expensive. But in the New World countries, the volume sales have gone up in that same period. Unfortunately, it's a common trend with domestic consumption for these countries as well. And I just picked a couple out, and here is the change. Growth in the number of wine consumers in the US is taken from the Wine Market Council. This is over an extended period of time, from generation to generation, where new consumers have started drinking or are drinking more wine. And all the growth in the US is coming with the younger consumers, the millennials, Generation X. The baby boomers are almost not contributing to growth in wine sales in the US, and anyone over the age of 65 says, wine, what is that? Now, looking at that value, I thought, what about Australia? And in Australia, Austat's data that comes from the Australian government looks at wine consumption and how it's increased over the last 50 years. And you can see here, that little orange line in the middle, that's wine consumption compared to beer on the top and spirits on the bottom. And the most interesting thing for me is that in the most recent 50 years, this period of growth for the Australian wine sector, domestic consumption of wine has increased from 12% of the adult population to 37% of the adult population in the most recent 50 years. Now that's a threefold increase in 50 years. They're doing something right in Australia, not only to increase export markets, but also to increase consumption of wine domestically. And the great news is that that's only a third of the population. If you look at the glass half full approach, that still means you've probably got a lot more growth that can come in that market if things are done well. Compare that to France. This data goes back from, again, the last 30 years, what's happened in France. In the period where consumption has declined, not only has France lost a lot of volume in global export markets, but domestically, they've gone from being more than 50% of the adult population in 1980 was a regular consumer of wine. That's at least every week. 50%. What is it now? 17%. What is happening in France? The country I live in, my heart's content, I cannot understand how a country with the reputation, the stereotype of being a group of individuals riding around on their bicycles, wearing a beret, carrying a baguette in their hand, piece of garlic in their backpack, a cigarette in one hand, and a glass of wine in the other. That glass of wine seems to be changing. Perhaps they're changing it to water, Coke, soft drinks, beer, whatever it is, but they're certainly not drinking wine anymore. The key finding, and what I've identified looking across the markets, is that new consumers are the key. All that growth in Australia, all that growth in the US, all that growth in expansive export markets has come from new consumers coming into the wine sector. It's not from us. We get press trips, we get dinners given to us. We have a repertoire of wines from which we can choose that is huge. Yet the new consumer starts with Yellowtail, Gallo, Concitoro, JP Chenet. All these wines, and when they go back after trying that once, if they like it, what do they go back looking for the second time? JP Chenet, Concitoro, Jacob's Creek, Gallo. They are the ones that are both loyal, and that's where the growth is in the market. And yet we somehow fool ourselves into believing that it's all about us. Wine producers growing their markets have increased exports and domestic consumption. Whatever they're doing well. And remember that these markets, these producers, have also faced extensive growth in domestic competition, an increase in producers in Australia 10 times during that same period. Says that whatever they're doing enough to get new consumers. So what I want to finish on is something that explains the disparity. You've got the European approach for selling, which in that period has been about fragmenting the offer, making more levels of quality, more layers to regions, regulating the product, increasing expenses, the cost of running the system, and consumers having to be educated to enjoy the wine. So of course, what are new consumers going to go for? They'll go, instead of looking at this picture, they'll be looking at something else they get from the new market. A transparent offer, a link to wine's lifestyle, and the way that they encourage new consumers. This is what they do. They come up with images that are attractive, that are appealing, that are simple to understand. We hate the idea of dumbing down wine. I don't care what you call it, and to me it's a semantic issue. You have to attract new consumers. And the new consumer does not know anything about terroir, they know wine. And they add to that red, or they add to that dry and sweet. Do something that's going to attract them to wine, and if they like it, they'll want to learn automatically. So I want to leave you on this list of the wine selling toolkit. The things that we don't do or what we haven't done well. communications don't. Selling on quality. It doesn't work. It hasn't worked for 30 years. Focusing on loyalty at the expense of new consumers. Creating niches in the market. Emphasising uniqueness. If it's unique and no one likes it, there's not much value in being unique. We are not here to educate the consumer. If they like it, they will learn. Focus on the producer, where they drink it, who they drink it with, where it was found, what for, availability and price, and show the changes in viewer numbers over time. And as a quote, I even heard this from one of our sponsors, and it's the line I wanted to leave you on. We used to sell almost all our wine in Spain. Now, most of our wine is in export, and that's with new consumers. They've gone from being a domestic seller of wines in a market where it's difficult. And this year, they might even hit 70% of their wines being exported. That's from Dynasty Vivanco, and that was from 2 nights ago. It can be done. We just have to want to do it, and we have to use the tools that can help us achieve our goals. Thanks very much for your time.
Okay, thank you, Damien. I'll try to keep it short, use 10 minutes. I'll ask Robert to tell me when the 10 minutes are over. I'm Mark, and the main thing I am is a wine consumer. And besides that, of course, I love wine, I love startups, I love innovation, I love new ideas. And actually, I've been working in the bank sector for about 10 years. And it was so boring that after 10 years, I found the courage to leave that world, and I jumped into the wine business. And what I did is that I launched Vino Gusto, which is an online wine guide based on user reviews. And what it does is pretty clear. It helps wine consumers to find the bottle of wine that they want to buy, and it tells them where to buy it. And for the wine professionals, what we are doing is that we are helping them to gain online exposure, not just to be online and look beautiful. No, we help them to gain online exposure and sell their wines, because that's what they need us to help them doing. And with the whole process of launching that company, Vino Gusto, well, I've been trapped into the Founders Institute, and there I've had the chance to collaborate to the launch and death of many wine-related startups. Actually, it was so sad that lately I came up to the idea of a new type of conference with my friend Faye Cardwell sitting here in the audience, which we called Wine Business Innovation Summit. And the whole purpose of that summit is to help new ideas, new business approaches to emerge in order to help the wine industry not only communicate, but really sell wines. And in order to do that, we want the industry to, one, take care of the consumer, two, take care of wine sales, just to make sure that whatever new idea we might have is based on a viable business model. Based on that experience, I came to the conclusion that if everyone involved in the wine industry would care about wine sales, the quality of the job that each of us are performing would be better, and the wine industry itself would be in a better shape today. That's why we came up with this title of the conference today, Your Job is to Sell Wine, Deal with It. And I know it's an idea that not all of us will like, because we all know that there is no wine business that can start without passion and calling. But it's not because the passion and the calling are at the birth of the project, or at the birth of the wineries, at the birth of the startups, the PR agencies, the communication projects and all that, that we have to consider words like commercial, sales, margins, revenues as dirty. We need this. And especially when we think of new, innovative approaches, because I believe that when we're talking about digital wine communication, we should not stick to blogs and the first day of Facebook. I hope we're going to come up with new ideas and new ways of doing. But for anyone wanting to launch a new project or a new startup in the wine business, please remember that something cool or nice is not enough. If you don't sell wine at the end of the day, you're going to disappear. So in order to try to make you understand my point of view, I put myself in the shoes of different actors of the wine industry. And the first one is the wine consumer. And you know, the wine consumer, you might like him to love reading long stories, books, and all that. But for most of the wine consumer, wine is just a product like another. And they don't have a lot of time to pick the wine. And actually, their only problem is, tell me which bottle of wine I could buy, where I do buy it, and make sure that I have the pleasure I deserve for the money I pay. Most of them think like that. Even if we like to dream, all of them read about wine for hours just because they want to be cultivated about it. It's not the case. They buy wine just like any other stuff. So I tell you that I don't know any wine consumer reading books, blogs, searching the internet and Googling about wine in order not to buy wine. If they do the effort to search for information, it's because they want to buy. And actually what they want you to do is solve their unique problem. Tell me what to buy and where to buy it. If you look at the wineries, wine regions, I know France and Belgium better than other countries, but when I'm doing some consultancy for wine regions or wineries in France, and that we sit down once a year with all the wineries, paying to the wine region and deciding which project will be delivered or achieved or not with their money, I can swear that most of the representatives of the wineries sitting around the table have only one criteria to decide if they're going to invest in a PR project, in a communication project, in a whatsoever project. And their question is, how does it sustain my sales? How does it help selling my wines in your country or on that market? So I believe that whoever's working with those regions, well, we shouldn't forget that the money that's paying us is the money wineries are making through their hard work. And so we shouldn't waste it whatsoever. And if we know that they need to sell their wines, whatever project we suggest them to go for, it has to help wine sales. They deserve that. We owe them that. We cannot go on being just thieves, using the money of the industry, not worrying about sales. Especially if we are in PR, marketing, communication, please, don't waste the money of those regions. I've got an example that drives me crazy. You know, Facebook? I've seen the Bordeaux wine region. They're spending like thousands of euros each month for their Facebook fan page and the community management and all things. First, I've never seen a community manager. It doesn't exist. A community is not managed. So when we are lucky, we have a community entertainer posting, you know, jokes and nice pictures about cats and wine glasses and all that. I don't know how much they spent. Well, actually, I know, but I don't want to say it. But today in France, they have like 167,000 fans for the Bordeaux wine page. I doubt it helped sell a single bottle of Bordeaux wine. And I believe it's something honest wine workers, honest people in this industry should stop selling to the wine region. You cannot use the winery's money to do such a thing. I had to talk about it because the whole conference started about the blogging concept. So if you're communicating with a blog, and please don't call me a blogger. You know why I hate this word, blogger? It's because my hairdresser, he has a blog. My father has a blog about flowers. The hairdresser, I believe it's about cars. I mean, there are loads of people using blogs, but it doesn't make them blogger. It's so, you know, narrow and diminishing. Most of the people using blogs, they have other skills and expertise, they perform other jobs, and they're way more than a type of person using a type of communication channel. And actually, I'm sure Robert's going to talk about it a little bit more, but there is something that I really love. It's the blogger schizophrenia. You know, I'm free, I'm a blogger, I write whatever I want. How the hell can I monetize my blog? That's crazy. Stop with that. Another thing that we are doing with blogs is that we are telling stories, great stories, beautiful stories. You know, I read a story about a winery and the wines, and I really feel the emotion. I feel like I want to drink this wine, I want to have it, and then the story stops. And nobody on the blog is telling me where I can buy the wine they've been talking about. So it's really like promising me something beautiful. They get me into a dream, and then just at the end, they tell me, hey, stop. It's not for you. I was just teasing you. That's not what the consumer is asking us when we're writing on blogs. They're asking us to share our passion, but also share the practical tips in order to find the wines, right? Same thing for the wine lover community. I believe there are many great things happening, but for consumers, just watching the wine lover community, it's not enough. We need to provide them with tips in order to help them. That's where I'm blocked. Okay. So this is my last slide, and the thing I want to ask you for us from today and in the future, well, I'm asking you, whatever you're doing in the wine industry, to care about wine sales. And in order to do that, first of all, pay attention to the consumer needs. They're the ones buying the wine at the end of the day. And I believe that there is no wine industry without wine sales. I also believe that thinking of wine sales, thinking of wine consumers, it will improve the quality of the content you're producing. And in the meantime, it's going to raise your audience, that's for sure. And actually raising your audience as a blogger or as someone using a blog in order to communicate will help sell yourself. And I still believe that many people using a blog are actually trying to sell themselves. I did it too, just to manage to change job and drop the bank for the wine business. Also, taking sales into account will help you develop meaningful business models, and we'll stop seeing all that money poured into wine-related startups that disappear within 6 months, which makes no sense. And last thing, I believe that taking wine sales into account will help you answer the calling and share your passion for wine for many years. Thank you.
Thank you, I do, and I'm going to put a different slide in quickly. I'd just like to pick up on two things that you've just heard, which just had some resonance for me. One of them, actually, maybe I won't use, I'll actually have to get back to the desktop here. Actually, I will let you do this. Can you get me back to the desktop for a second, please? Two things. How can you increase wine consumption? You saw, I need to get back to can you get back to the desktop on here? Quickly? No, sorry, I don't. Sorry, lovely. Get me out of there and into the desktop. Sorry, two questions. How do you actually increase wine consumption in France? I'll tell you how you do it, because I've seen the statistics. If you saw Damien's slide showing that reduction since the 60s, actually there was a lift in between 1990 and 1995. And do you know what they did between 1990 and 1995? They brought in the Loi Evin, the law that actually restricted advertising and stopped sponsorship and all those things. So that obviously helped make people buy more wine and stop the reduction. Of course it didn't. Correlation and causation, it's a rule. The fact that two things happen doesn't mean to say there's any connection between them. But anybody who says the restricting advertising and so on had a huge effect in France, no, it didn't. The other point I'd like to pick up from Mark, there's a very good wine blogger in Britain called, you may have heard of, called Jamie Good, who's done a manifesto recently. It's worth a look. But in there, he says there are too many commercial palates. So what's the opposite of a commercial palate? An uncommercial palate. And what does uncommercial mean? It means something you can't sell. So is that really what anybody wants to be about? Actually making unsaleable wine? Doesn't matter if your wine is €1 or 1,000 euros, you have to sell it. Now I've got a quick question for you guys. How many of you are wine producers in the room? Any? Okay, I'd like to ask you, I was going to do this in a slide, but I'll just do it sort of show of hands. I've got 4 reasons why you might make wine. I want them in order of importance. What's the number 1 of my 4 options? 1 is to represent, to reflect the terroir and the vintage of each year. The second is to actually express your personality and your taste. The third is to give pleasure. And the fourth is to make money. So hands up those who do it to reflect the terroir first. Any hands? Can I see any hands there? How many people do it actually to reflect themselves? And how many people do it to give pleasure? And how many people do it to make money? Well, thankfully, not that many said their first reason for doing it was to reflect the terroir. That's a perfectly nice reason to have a hobby or whatever, and the same thing applies to reflecting yourself. Actually, most people, here's a big surprise, most people buy wine for pleasure. So if you make wine that will give them pleasure, that is actually a good transaction, and you might make some money out of it anyway. And if you happen to be reflecting the terroir, that's terrific. But if you're just making wine to reflect the terroir, then you're not in business, it's a hobby, and I hope you've actually got another income, because the chances are you're not actually going to make much money at it. Now, as communicators, why do you guys, the rest of you, are you all bloggers? Communicators? Okay, why do you do that? Do you do that to actually express yourselves? Hands up. Do you do that actually to convey information? Hands up. And do you do that actually to make money? Well done, those of you who do it to make money. There aren't very many of us out there blogging who are making money, but that's a very good reason for doing it. Doing it to express yourself is nice, but again, it's like having a hobby. It's like being an artist. Actually, what people go to your blogs for is information, and if you don't give them information, or at least some pleasure, they're not actually going to be there. So you really have to think about that, and I look at so many of the blogs and the stuff I see, and it is all about, as Richard Siddle said earlier today, it's about me, 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 me. Now, I'm the guy who puts his hand up at this conference and asks the question, and everybody says, why has he asked that question? Why has he hogged the microphone? My question is, you guys, why didn't you get to the microphone first? Why aren't you asking the questions? And that's my problem as an editor sometimes. I'm seeing stuff from bloggers, from journalists, and they're not asking the questions they should have asked. Now, my question to you guys, were you on the keynote yesterday? Yes? How many of you who are communicators, bloggers, journalists, took a mental note to go away and look into the link between wild yeast and cancer? How many of you actually made a mental note to go and find out about all the trees and the oak chips and the barrels? There were 2 things that we were given. They were quite controversial. And all I heard and all I saw on Twitter was people didn't like Clark Smith calling people bastards, and they didn't like what he said about this and that. I didn't see any references to those 2 things, which are really quite interesting. And if we were really journalists, if we were really communicators and really bloggers, we would actually have that in our head saying, I really need to find out about that. Actually, the guy was lying to us. It's not true. Or actually, it's really quite interesting. I should do some more about it. And just ask yourselves, how many real stories have been broken by wine journalists or wine bloggers? The story of Rudy Curran's fake wines, that was broken online. That was great. And the story about Burgundy Premox has really been analyzed online. But how many other stories are actually being broken? Now, 8 lesser-known countries and regions. They all make wine. Okay. Which get the media coverage? Those 3. Anybody disagree? Anyone seen an awful lot of coverage on New York State wines or Canadian or Bulgarian wines? I haven't. Those are the ones with the budgets. Virginia Wine, here's their strategic marketing plan. And you don't have to read the stuff, but basically we need to get a minimum of 10 favorable reviews by premier national media. You have to be a premier one. Obviously, if you're just the second, you don't want to be Coach, do you? You have to be first-class media. But that's what they're spending their money on. So, and then we've got here Wines of Lebanon. It wins its Best Generic Campaign Award. Spent lots of money on actually running a campaign in the UK, which they didn't elsewhere. And some of you were here in Turkey at this event in Turkey last year. Big Turkish export push. Note that, that's 2004, which by my reckoning is 9 years ago, and they've spent a lot of money talking to the media. That's us. So, did the media coverage convert into sales? Did all the wonderful words that we all wrote actually turn into sales of bottles of Turkish wine? Well, I've got these statistics here from the Turkish authorities, and yes, they're making more money. Actually, the value on the right, the V numbers have gone up, but actually all those red circles is the number of bottles they've sold, number of litres. So it hasn't actually gone up, it's actually gone down. Okay, it's worth a bit more money, but we're not drinking more Turkish wine. What did we, as bloggers and communicators, do when we were in Turkey last year? We went up to all these nice Turkish producers and we said to them, or most of us did, please, Mr. Nice Turkish Producer, don't plant any of those international varieties. Please don't make Cabernet Sauvignon and Chardonnay and those sort of things. We like your ancient grapes. We like the grapes that have been growing for 4 million years. And if possible, if you could actually put them in amphora, that would be better. And if you couldn't use any sulfur, that would be even better still. And if you could make it cloudy and taste like cider, we'd be even happier because it wouldn't taste like all that horrible Chardonnay and Merlot and Cabernet and stuff that everybody else makes, and which consumers like to buy. Let's look at Portugal, another country where we've gone and said the same things. Hey, Mr. Portuguese man, let's have more Trincadeira, let's have some more Touriga Nacional, and da-da-da. Yes, it's great. I love some of those wines. Not all. But which is the successful brand in Portugal? Tagus Creek. And what does it make? It makes blends of international grapes and the local ones because that's what consumers understand and like. And we are very irresponsible if we actually go to these producers and give them advice which actually has no relevance to what they can actually sell. So and the interesting thing is, here's where the Turks sold their wine. I'm not sure how many Belgians there are in the room apart from Mark, but obviously Mark's done pretty well on Turkish wine. Cyprus, that's the home team. Germany, England, all those Americans who blogged and came and talked about Turkish wine, I'm sorry, you're not on the list. Basically, England, we've got quite a number of Turks living in England, it's not great. Virginia, huge amounts of money spent on talking about Virginian wine. Yeah, a significant portion. They've actually not selling a lot. 5,800 cases it's gone up to. It's not a lot. A significant portion of the exports were driven by new sales to China. So was that all those bloggers they took out to Virginia to take around all the wineries? Are we actually doing anything? Are we not, back to Mr. Siddle's slide, are we not talking to ourselves? Now, there's no such thing as a free bottle of wine, a tasting, a trip, a dinner, or a winemaker lunch. I hate to tell you this, but your hosts don't really love you. They didn't invite you because you're great company or they like the way you look or anything else. They need to sell wine. And if you're not going to help them to do that, and I just mean your host being a winery, that could be a region, whatever, you are not there because you're a pretty face. If you're not going to help them do that, they are not going to invite you anymore. This is a wonderful thing. The same day I got on my website, on my email, I got this from the Bordeaux, from US Guest Post, Harvest in Bordeaux, blogger trip. 2013 has been challenging for the region, yet winemakers are adamant that weather conditions will not affect the quality of the future wines. Should their level of passion, pride, and savoir-faire be any indication of the argument, we'll certainly side with them. No problem in Bordeaux at all. Great 2013, terrific vintage. Gavin Quinney, producer in Bordeaux. Actually, this is not been a really good vintage. Basically, it's crap. But if these people are being flown over, they're being nice. Well, what value is there in being one of those bloggers? You're a patsy. You're just a pet of the PR people who've flown you in. Now, and he's saying that actually the Bordeaux producers don't like paying for this. It's a waste of their money. And if you're not actually getting the effect, what's going to happen? Now, the interesting thing is I talk to clients now, and we're actually talking about why do we invite these people? What are they doing? And if they're not doing anything, the invitations will actually dry up. And I don't know how many of you were at the SEO session yesterday, but it was a brilliant session. And Judy actually introduced us to a number of techniques. Now, up until now, the wine industry has been very unprofessional. No one's noticed how few people read wine columns or newspapers or whatever, including wine magazines like Decanter. But we're moving into the area of accountability. We know how many people, if you've got ads on your blog, they know how many people are clicking or how few. And there are so many means out there now of seeing how many people are really reading what you're writing, or actually what effect you're having. I look stuff up on Twitter all the time. Is anyone actually following what I'm saying? Is anyone picking up on the subjects I'm writing about? Is anyone picking up the subjects other people are writing about? And you start thinking about, actually, we've got WhatsApp, we've got Clout, we've got Cred, you've got all these things. And you can say, well, Clout's not worth anything and Cred's not worth. But actually, if you add them all up and your name's not there, hey, you may not find the invitations are coming quite as readily as they did. If you're actually just talking to yourself, why don't you stay and do it at home? Why don't you sing to yourself in the shower rather than imagine that people are going to buy your album? And we're now, read this bit, here we go, Cision Social Media, and Vintank, Paul Mabray does this, analysis reports on 100 million blogs. They're watching you. Forget Mr. Snowden. The wine companies and the wine regions, if they're not watching you now, they soon will be. And they're actually identify the key influences. They're looking at it. So, if they don't already know you're talking to yourself, and they'll start to go elsewhere. And so now we have paid posts. And now my last slide, which isn't going to come up, should do. Here it is. No, it isn't. Basically, we've got advertisers saying, how much should we pay our bloggers? How much should I earn as a blogger to do reviews? In wine, it hasn't happened yet very much. But you go into the tech blogs, and there are people who are making money out of reviewing Canon cameras or reviewing whatever the product is. But what actual validity, what veracity is there if people know that you're being paid to do it? Now, I'm actually just started something here. I don't know if it's going to come up on the slide. It isn't. I've started something which I can give you an address to, which is called Great Food and Wine Sites. And interesting thing is we're bringing food sites, wine sites, commercial sites, and blogger sites, and we're giving the consumer the ability to rate the sites out of 5 stars. And the ones they give more stars to will go to the top, and the other ones will go to the bottom. But we will see how many people like what you're doing. And you've got to start doing that for yourselves and picking up on what Mark said. Actually, ultimately, wine is not an academic product. It is stuff that people drink for pleasure. They buy it, they drink it, they share it with their friends, and our job is to facilitate that unless we're academics. And you've got an academic sitting in the room, and he thinks we should be doing that. Thank you very much.
We don't have time, but we're going to go for a few questions anyway.
Hello. I think we're missing something here because we're talking about the consumer, we're talking about the winery, and nobody's mentioned the distributor.
I think that's a very valid point.
Because I sell wine in 22 different countries. The US, I've been now fighting with it for about 3 years because what I've seen in the US market, what's happening is the big distributors are not taking any more wine brands. They're making their own wine brands and bottling themselves. So the US, I've had to adjust and do state by state, going for the big distributors, smaller statal distribution. And I think, Sell Wine Deal about it, I think we're missing out on a very important link to the end customer. And what I want to ask is, how should we be approaching the distributor with blogging and...
I think you're making can I do that? I think you're making a very valid point. In fact, we're talking later on about who are the communicators, and I'm going to include it in there. But one of the problems we're going to have, and I didn't say it there, but it's coming, is the distributor is having his own blog. He's got his own communicators. So you have either got to work with him or you'll be working against him. And essentially, he is closer to his consumer than you are. Tesco's has its own wine fairs. If you sell to Tesco, you are invited to pay them money to turn up and pour wines at their wine fair, but it's their community. Tesco is inviting its customers to put together their ideal packages of wines. So they are creating that link, and that could, in the US, you've got your three-tier system, so it's different, but the same thing applies. My point back to you, which is not actually disagreeing with you, if we as producers create the link with the consumer, the distributor will be obliged to play with us. At the moment, we have always allowed the distributor to do the work. We as producers say, hello, Mr. Distributor, please sell my wine. You've found that that's not working very well. I make wine, I have the same thing. But the champagne houses actually have created a link with the consumer. I, as a consumer, have a relationship with Veuve Clicquot. I don't rely on the man in the middle to create that link. And I think that's, and our problem, just very briefly, is that our margins are too low, so we don't have the money to put into the marketing we should do. In California, they're much better at that. They've got higher margins, better marketing, and better relationships.
If I can just add a point or two to that, I think we have to blame ourselves for this, because the producer has the product, they have something that consumers want, and the retailers have the consumers. The distributor is stuck in the middle. They've got to provide some sort of value, and because they haven't, the retailers have gone, well, we don't need the distributors, we're going to try and short circuit or do it ourselves. Because a classic example was I was presenting here in Spain 2 months ago, and a number of presentations I went to, it wasn't this presentation, but it was about the same topic, and the audience, the producers, would simply turn around and go, it's not my responsibility to sell my wine, that's the distribution channel. So they think that that's their job. We need to make it our job and provide a level of service. We need to add something, to add value to our offer as distributors.
And just briefly, one point. The word commercial is negative. The word brand, we don't like brands. Most bloggers hate wine brands because that's a nasty, dirty word. I'm sorry, every one of us is a brand. If we're a blogger, if we're a communicator, and every wine out there, it doesn't matter if you're the tiniest little producer in a tiny village somewhere, you are a brand. You're just probably not a very successful brand. But essentially, we have got to build our brands, whoever we are, to the point at which we have more value. We've got to put that value in. And as communicators, we're important because we're able to help some of those brands grow affordably. They can't afford to advertise. In some places, it's illegal. So we can help them build those brands. Justin. Oh, sorry.
Hello. I just wanted to make an observation which I think helps to clarify the relationship between money and wine, and why money is not a dirty word when it comes to wine. It's actually what creates the wine in the first place. So I don't believe that God came down from heaven one day and struck his magic wand at Burgundy and said, I create the hill of Courtin. This is now created. And then people then found that and discovered how good it was. The hill of Courtin only produced wine that was more expensive and better because there was a market there. People had money, they wanted to buy a better wine, and that entire appellation system of Burgundy is created because there's a finely distinguishing market of people who want to pay more money for a better wine. So I have a belief that there's like a terroir of money that you have to link with your terroir of land, and the terroir of customers is really important, and money is what drives the origination of the wine business.
I can only agree, so it's not that I want to add something to what you just said. I still have a kind of problem, or I'm worried when I hear so many people saying that the money side of the wine business is something they don't want to care about. That worries me a lot, because in the same sentence, they might say, I want to help those small producers I discovered on my own during my trip, and on the other side, they say, I don't want to care about wine sales, which is totally crazy. to me, and I don't understand that point of view, and I will never understand it. But I don't think we disagree here, so.
I think one of the things is because the winemakers are so bad at telling their own stories, they all say the same things. You know, mine is a beautiful chateau, or I've got 100 points, or whatever. It's the same story over and over again. And we, as communicators, are very bad at actually asking them questions about the other things. I was at a dinner last night, and a lovely bodega, nice wines, and we were told the facts about the wines. We were not actually told anything about the background. We were given nothing yesterday evening. They were delightful at the time, but we weren't told anything that would actually help sell that wine beyond the fact that it's been in new oak barrels and so on. Now, and none of us as journalists were saying, excuse me, give us another story. Now, if we ask them to give us the stories and they give us the stories and we publish them, we get more interesting for our readers, we help them sell more wine. It's a win-win for everyone, and the consumer gets to drink more good wine. Pia?
Observation for Mark. Hi. Obviously speaking to a lot of communicators, and your point is that they need to focus more on sales in that kind of work. My experience is working with lots of people in traditional sectors that they're almost too focused on sales, which makes them forget the wider picture of what's going to bring those sales, which is consumer, brand, and the kind of people they need in their organizations to make those things work properly.
Well, you make a point, but what I realize in the wine industry, compared to the banking sector, because I've seen people selling different things and other products than wine, I believe in the wine industry, the technology, the know-how, the skills, everything's there to create and offer delicious, beautiful wines to the consumers. The only problem is that when you look at the wine industry, quite often, I hear the PR people or the communicators telling me, oh, for that kind of question, wait for our salespeople to contact you. So it's really like they look at their own part of the job and they neglect what their colleagues are doing. And when it's like that, I believe it's a real problem, because I've seen wineries missing sales just because the one I was talking to decided it wasn't his or her role to talk about the dirty sales part. And when it comes to that, we have a real problem, right? And that's what I see nowadays. So I believe that in any other type of industry, nobody would accept that the employees of a company or the different actors of the business would pretend they don't care about sales. And here in the wine industry, unfortunately, in France, I hear it quite often. It's not my job. I don't care. They have to sell it. It's a real problem to me.
I think they were a bit above you. I think Pia.
Okay. I think the title of this presentation, of this panel, was chosen to be slightly provocative. I will return that by being slightly provocative back to you. I think, in particular, the presentation by Mark, I think you have, in my view, an attitude problem. You use phrases like, we owe the winemakers this. Don't waste the money that the wineries spend on feeding and giving you wines. I think that's the wrong way of looking at it. I can agree with you that we're all here to sell wine as a concept. We're all here because we want that the world should drink more wine, should drink more good wines, more nice wines. But if we as communicators, or even worse, if we want to call ourselves as journalists, if we put our loyalty, as you seem to be doing, with the wineries, I think that's wrong. Our loyalties need to be with the readers, the consumers, rather than with the producers.
Okay, but I believe there are two parts in what I'm saying. The first part is always, I worry about the consumers. I'm a consumer myself, and that's the way I define myself. It's the first line of my first slide. And as a consumer, I need help in order to choose and find my wines. And that's the first thing I'm expecting from any communication or content I'm reading. I want information, and I want a story, and I want emotions that will bring me to the point where I think, whoa, perhaps that's the wine for me. I want to try it, I want to buy it. And then quite often I miss the part telling me where I can find it or where I can buy it. But that's my consumer emotion. And then the second part of my job is quite often to help wine regions with their strategy. And their strategy they build is financed by the money every winery is giving them, right? And when I see PR agencies, but especially marketing agencies, coming up with big projects, very expensive, like Facebook strategies and online strategies and all that, and at the end of the day, I see the money of the wineries is used in order to build something that's not helping them in their day-to-day life, well, I have a problem. So I think I have both and mixed feelings. And I'm not saying that wine communicators are doing something wrong with the wineries' money. I say that I see some real professional businesses wasting the money of the wineries, and that's a problem.
We've got to wrap up then.
Yep.
Okay. You want to wrap up? Do you want to say?
Well, thank you for being here, because we knew it was a subject that some people wouldn't like, because it's a little bit about watching ourselves and see what we do well and what we could improve. I believe Robert and Damien, they have way many other things to share with you than what they've done today. So I invite all of us to go on with those conversations during the next days. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
You're welcome.